Story 1. The Creepy Man on Halloween. When I was 9 years old, Halloween was the best night of the year. My friend Jack and I had been waiting weeks for it. We planned everything: our costumes, the houses we would visit, and even how to fill our pillowcases with the most candy. The whole night was about fun, candy, and just a little bit of mischief. Like every year, we put on our costumes, grabbed pillowcases, and stepped into the night. The streets were alive with other kids, some dressed as monsters, others as superheroes or ghosts. Jack was a vampire, complete with a red-lined cape, and I was a skeleton with glow-in-the-dark bones. The cool autumn air made our cheeks feel cold, but we didn't mind. The only lights came from street lamps and the glowing jack-o'-lanterns on porches, making everything feel exciting and just a little spooky. Our plan was simple: visit every house in the neighborhood before it got too late. The first part of the night felt perfect. We knocked on doors, shouted, "Trick or treat," and filled our bags with candy. People smiled at us, complimented our costumes, and wished us a happy Halloween. But as we moved further from home, things started to feel different. The streets grew quieter, with fewer kids around. Houses became more spread out, and many didn't have their porch lights on. The festive feeling began to fade. That's when we saw him. At the end of the street, near an old, abandoned house that nobody lived in, stood a tall man in dark clothes. At first, we didn't think much of it. Maybe he was waiting for his kids to finish trick or treating. But as we kept walking, we noticed he wasn't moving, just standing there, watching us. His face was hidden in the shadows, making it hard to see him clearly. Jack and I whispered to each other about him, but decided to keep going. I tried to act like it didn't bother me, though I felt a bit uneasy. The candy in my pillowcase was getting heavy, and I was almost ready to call it a night. We were on a stretch of road with only a few trees and empty lots when I realized something strange. The man was following us. His steps were slow, but he was definitely keeping pace with us. Jack noticed it too. He glanced back over his shoulder and whispered, "He's following us." "Let's just keep walking," I said, trying to sound brave. But my heart started to beat faster. After a few more minutes, the man did something even stranger. He called out to us. "Hey, kids," he said in a low, rough voice. "You want more candy?" We stopped and turned around. In his hand, he held a large plastic bag stuffed with candy. For a second, I felt excited. More candy sounded great. But then I felt a knot in my stomach. Why would a grown man be standing alone in the dark, offering candy to random kids? "I think we should go over," I told Jack. Jack grabbed my arm and shook his head. "No, we need to leave," he whispered, his face pale. "That guy's not right. He wants to take us." Jack was always more cautious than me. Usually, I thought he worried too much. But this time, I could see real fear in his eyes. Something about the man wasn't right. The man took a step closer. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It looked fake, too wide, like he was pretending to be nice. "Come on," the man said. "It's Halloween. I've got lots of candy." That's when I knew Jack was right. We had to get away fast. "Run," Jack whispered. We turned and sprinted down the street as fast as we could, our bags of candy thudding against our legs. The man's heavy footsteps pounded behind us. He was chasing us. My heart raced and my legs burned as I pushed myself to run faster. I could hear his breathing close behind us, loud in the quiet night. I didn't dare look back. All I could think about was getting home and being safe. Our house was only a few streets away, but it felt like miles. Jack stayed right beside me, running as hard as he could without saying a word. Finally, we reached our street. But the man was still behind us, closer than ever. I could hear his boots hitting the pavement, getting louder with every step. We cut across a neighbor's yard, jumped over some bushes, and ran up to my front door. My hands were shaking so much I fumbled with the doorknob. But somehow, I got the door open. Jack and I threw ourselves inside and slammed the door shut. We stood in the hallway, breathing hard, our hearts pounding in our chests. For a moment, everything was silent. Then we heard slow, heavy footsteps right outside the door. We held our breath, listening. The footsteps stopped just outside. My heart pounded in my chest. Then, after a few seconds, the footsteps started again, moving away. We peeked through the window and watched as the man walked off into the night. He didn't look back. He just disappeared into the darkness, like nothing had happened. We never told anyone about what happened that night. Maybe we thought no one would believe us, or maybe we just wanted to forget it. But every Halloween, I think about that man. I wonder who he was and what he really wanted. Jack and I never talked about it again. But I know he remembers too. It's the kind of thing you don't forget, no matter how hard you try. Story 2. The strange party guest. In 2019, my old college friends and I decided to throw a Halloween party. We hadn't seen each other in years, so we figured this would be the perfect way to reconnect. Alex, the most successful among us, offered to host the party at his big house in the suburbs. The house was decked out for Halloween. Jack-o'-lanterns glowed on the porch, fake cobwebs draped from the ceiling, and eerie music played softly in the background. It felt just like the old days, except now, everything was a little fancier. I arrived late, wearing a quick zombie nurse costume I threw together. When I walked in, the house was filled with familiar faces, laughing and drinking. It felt good to see everyone again, even though we were all a bit older now. But as the night went on, I noticed someone strange. There was a man standing in the corner, wearing a mask that looked disturbingly real, like a stretched human face. The skin was pale and waxy, and the eyes seemed too sunken. It made my skin crawl. At first, I assumed he was one of Alex's friends, but he didn't talk to anyone, didn't drink, and just stood there, watching. Alex noticed him too. I saw Alex walk over and ask, "Who are you? Whose friend are you?" The man didn't answer. He just stood there. Frustrated, Alex reached out, probably to pull off the mask. That's when the man stepped back and pulled out a gun. The robbery and the mask. The music stopped suddenly, and everyone froze. At first, it didn't make sense. People stood still, trying to figure out what was going on. My heart pounded so hard, I could feel it in my throat. The room was silent and heavy with fear. "Stay quiet," a man's voice growled. He wasn't shouting, but his tone was harsh enough to scare us all. He stood in front of us, holding a gun. His face was hidden by a creepy, lifeless mask. "Empty your pockets, phones, wallets, jewelry. Put everything on the floor." No one dared to move at first. It felt like the air itself was thick with fear, making it hard to think or breathe. The room seemed to shrink, and it was like the walls were closing in around us. Nobody even considered running or trying to fight back. The sight of the gun made us feel helpless, frozen like statues. Then, one by one, people reached into their pockets. A phone hit the floor with a soft thud. A wallet dropped. Jewelry clinked as it landed in a pile. These sounds were the only noises breaking the silence, aside from my shallow, shaky breaths. I scanned the room, hoping someone would do anything to stop this. But everyone stood in place, pale and terrified. I saw my friend Alex looking around nervously, his eyes darting from side to side as if he was trying to think of a plan. Then I noticed Megan. She had been my roommate back in college, quiet, but always smart. Without making a sound, she slipped behind the group, inching her way toward the bathroom door. She was careful, moving slowly so the man wouldn't notice her. My stomach twisted with fear. If he saw her sneaking away. But he didn't. His focus stayed locked on us as he scanned the room with his gun. Megan reached the bathroom door, slipped inside, and disappeared just as the masked man glanced over. I held my breath, praying he hadn't noticed her. "Everyone stay calm," the man warned, his voice low and threatening. "Nobody needs to get hurt." The minutes felt like hours as he walked around the room, picking up the pile of stolen items and stuffing them into a bag. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I could feel the fear gripping me like a tight rope around my chest. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The man backed toward the exit, his gun still aimed at us. Slowly, he slipped out the door and disappeared into the night. For a few moments, nobody moved. We were too shocked to understand what had just happened. Then, far off in the distance, I heard the faint sound of sirens. I let out the breath I hadn't even realized I was holding. The police arrived moments later. Megan had called them from the bathroom. She was shaking, but safe. They searched the area, but the man was already long gone, like he had vanished into the darkness. We gave our statements to the police, piecing together what had just happened. It turned out the robber wasn't just a random criminal. He was part of a gang that had been crashing parties and robbing people for months. They would sneak in, pretend to be guests, and wait for the right moment to pull out their guns. But this time, they made a mistake. The police caught him a few days later. They found the mask, the gun, and a stash of stolen items from other parties. The officers told us we were lucky that Megan had the courage to call for help, and lucky that no one got hurt. Even though the man was arrested, I couldn't forget the way that mask looked. It wasn't just a disguise, it felt alive, as if it had eyes of its own. And sometimes, late at night, I still feel like that mask is watching me. I know it sounds crazy, but the memory of that night is burned into my mind. No matter how hard I try to forget, I'll always remember the lifeless, pale face of that mask. Underscore 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 the haunted house. When we first moved into the old house, everyone warned us. That place is haunted, they said. We didn't believe them. People in small towns love to talk, and we thought it was just silly gossip. The house was old. Yes, the paint was peeling, the floorboards creaked, and there were cobwebs in every corner. But it had charm. There was something about it that felt right, like it had potential. We spent the first few weeks fixing things, patching holes in the walls, repairing the windows, and getting comfortable. Life felt normal. Then Halloween came. That night, the air felt different, colder, heavier. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the house. My wife and kids were upstairs getting ready for bed, but I stayed up a bit longer, sitting by the fireplace in the living room. The flames flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. For a moment, it felt like the house was breathing along with me, as if it was alive. Then I heard it a whisper. It was faint, coming from somewhere below. At first, I thought it was just the wind or the house settling, but the sound didn't stop. It was a low murmur, like distant voices. Curiosity got the better of me, so I grabbed a flashlight and headed for the basement. The wooden stairs creaked as I made my way down. The basement was cold and dark, with bare cement floors and shelves full of dusty tools. I shined the flashlight around, and everything looked normal until I saw it. A door. It stood against the far wall, tall and strange. I knew it hadn't been there before. We had cleaned this basement many times, and I would have noticed it. The door was old, with strange symbols carved into the wood symbols I didn't recognize. I touched the surface. It felt rough and hollow, like there was nothing behind it. A part of me wanted to turn around and go back upstairs, but the whispers grew louder, pulling me closer. Without thinking, I grabbed the handle and opened the door. It creaked open slowly, revealing complete darkness, not the kind you get when the lights are off, but a deep, endless void. I shined my flashlight into it and saw something impossible, a long, narrow hallway stretching into the distance. It didn't make sense. The basement wasn't big enough for a hallway like that. But there it was, waiting. The whispers were louder now, coming from the walls of the hallway. I knew I should have turned back, but something made me step inside. The walls were made of cold stone, and my footsteps echoed as I walked. Shadows flickered at the far end of the hallway, but every time I looked directly at them, they disappeared. When I tried to leave, the door was gone. Panic flooded me as I realized I was trapped. The hallway stretched on forever, with no way out. The whispers surrounded me, filling the air. Just as I was ready to give up, I saw the door again. It stood in front of me, as if it had been waiting the whole time. I ran to it and yanked it open. As soon as I stepped through, the door slammed shut behind me. I was back in the basement, but something was different. The air felt heavy, and the whispers hadn't stopped. I could still hear them, faint but constant. My wife came downstairs, asking what I was doing. I didn't know how to explain it to her. Since that night, the house hasn't been the same. Shadows move where they shouldn't, and the floors creak even when no one is walking on them. The worst part is that the door keeps coming back. Sometimes we find it in a closet, other times behind a bookshelf. No matter how many times we close it, it always returns. The whispers keep urging us to open it again, promising peace. But I know better. That door isn't just a door, it's a portal to something far worse. And now, whatever we let out is still here. It watches, waits, and whispers, hoping we'll open the door again.